Hello, so this is our final tech assessment presentation. My name is Levi.
I'm Zach.
I'm James.
And I'm going to be going first. Right. So, hello guys. I'm Levi. My tech assessment is going to be on safety harnesses in the construction industry. So, some background information. What safety harnesses are is it's a form of personal protective equipment designed to protect workers from injuries during potential falls. Um, Instead of stopping a fall from like the older style of body belt, modern harnesses distribute the force across the whole body. So you can see on the picture, there's two loops at the bottom that go around your legs. The two at the top, you put your arms through, and it just distributes the force of that fall whenever the lanyard stops and catches you. So it really reduces the injury. OSHA requires these systems anytime a worker is exposed to fall hazards at 6 feet or higher. The technology is simple itself, but the correct use, fit, and the anchorage point where you connect the lanyard to makes it effective. So we got to make sure, training and everything like that really goes into the effectiveness of safety harnesses. The 1950s is when full body harnesses became more common and improved stability and comfort for the workers. In the 1990s, the dorsal D-ring, which you can see in the image, got improved, and as well as the shock absorbing lanyard, just improved the effectiveness in keeping the workers safe after they fall. So, modern construction uses full body harnesses. The parts of it is the full body harness itself, the lanyard, and then the anchorage point. So anywhere um, above head is supposed to where it's supposed to attach to that can hold up to 5,000 pounds is the anchorage point. So my values, um, I value the human life. So preventing the leading cause of construction fatalities is falls. So I value the human life. I value the worker's dignity and respect. In today's day and age of technology and everything that we can do, um, it the workers deserve this equipment that protects them from the workplace hazards. They're just trying to go to work, provide for them and their families. So, workers should not be dying at rates seen in the previous history. And so providing these this life-saving equipment shows the value that we place on workers. And I also value compliance and accountability. We have OSHA, which is the government organization who provides um, standards for the employers to keep workers safe across the United States. So why I think these values are important. Falls have been always and still are the leading cause of death. So working towards solutions and providing, fall protection like safety harnesses is important. Workers have access to fall protection with the help of OSHA, and making sure employers provide for the workers. They also workers have the right to stop work if that equipment is not provided to them or they don't feel safe doing it. Also, safety harnesses, just in general, prevent the serious injury or death when working at heights, and the technology that goes into it um, decreases the potential injuries if they do fall. Some principles. Um, Safety first. Every worker must be protected from fall hazards before the work begins. Fit and use matter. So making sure the harness is sized, worn, and anchored correctly will actually provide that protection. So that leads into training. I think training really enables the protection to be used the correct way and actually be able to provide the protection. So making sure it's used correctly and training so the workers know how to use it correctly is important. Some major policies, all of these are from OSHA. OSHA states has a fall protection policy. All workers at heights of 6 feet or more in the construction industry must use fall protection equipment. Safety harnesses are the most common fall protection equipment. Policy 2 is the PPE fit requirement. Employers must ensure the PPE fits each worker and that they are using it correctly to the manufacturer's recommendations. And the third policy is training and competent persons. So a competent person must train the workers on how to put on the harness, inspect the harness regularly. The competent person is who does that. So it's important to have those competent people in your company to train the workers. So I wanted to cover some weaknesses and gaps. For the most part, harnesses are amazing. The actual harness issuance, so the availability and the use directly reduces fall injuries, and it reduces deaths as well. Policies mandate the use, so OSHA, is very important that it actually keeps the employers um, to where they put the safety of their workers first. So mandating the use, they mandate the training and the inspection of the fall harnesses. So some weaknesses, improper fit is still common. So employee PPE often doesn't fit smaller or larger workers. Employers kind of have to go out of the way, find those extra smalls and those, 5XLs, stuff like that. So I actually see that in my life as well, working in construction. Um, Training may not be continuous or reinforced. A lot of times I see workers come in from a job site as the work for the demand, the manpower, increases as the job gets busier, and they're not always trained, the first time as soon as they come on. Um, Annual training is pretty easy. You can just make sure, once a year you're doing it, but you have new employees coming in. So that's one weakness I see is training. Not always, every worker is not always trained. And then also some job sites bypass the harness use where it should be mandatory. So they'll look at the standards and try to find a way that they don't need to use harnesses, and often that's just not true and not correct. So I have two questions, and I also wanted to see if you guys have any questions or comments. Does anyone know why is the full body harness required over a body belt?
I mean, you kind of mentioned it earlier, but it's like it distributes the force a lot better when somebody falls, whereas
Mhm.
like a body belt's kind of just like around the waist, whereas like full body harness is like you have like secure points like around your arms and like your legs and stuff. So like it has a much lower chance of injuring a person should they fall.
Correct. The older body belts, they would even fall out. Like if you fall, you'll also, you'll hang upside down, and that doesn't, you can't stay there for too long. For the full body harness, when you hang, you need to get taken out, relatively quickly, but you can last a lot longer in a full body harness than a body belt as well.
Right.
So, what can workers do if they are not provided safety equipment?
I mean, you mentioned earlier that could just not, they could refuse to work. So if they're not provided the equipment or feel unsafe, just upright refuse to work in the dangerous situations.
Yeah, yeah, OSHA protects the workers with that. They the workers have the right and protection to not work if they don't have the correct equipment, or there's a hazard, especially fall hazards. They're told in my company to talk to their foreman, and then the foreman will take it to their supervisor, and they'll be correctly fix those types of things. So, are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I have one. So, um, I'd say, full body harnesses are probably like pretty widely adopted at this point, or even mandated.
Hmm.
Um, but still, like falls are the leading cause of death on construction sites. Do you think that's mostly because of like lack of informant or yeah, lack of enforcement, or workers just like do the work anyways despite not being provided, the PPE?
Hmm.
Um, and, like why do you think falls are still the leading cause of death?
Yeah, I think it's the severity. So if you do fall, it doesn't take much of a height to cause that. I think workers um, don't always they take a lot of shortcuts, and they are too much focused on the work that they're doing and not the safety of them themselves. That can be because they're maybe not as educated, or they get complacent. They've been doing it for years, and that's when the serious injuries happen. When um, someone has been doing it for a long time and don't go ahead and use the protection. I think a lot of time, I wouldn't say it's because it's not provided, because I do see it provided, almost every time. It's just that the workers, don't have that safety mindset as much as, the safety professionals and the upper management do. So, any other comments?
I just kind of have a question about like OSHA's involvement. Like um how much of a hand do they have in like enforcing this? Because I know, like you said earlier, that a lot of the like workplaces kind of just push it aside, like all the regulations. Like
Hmm.
how does OSHA go about dealing with all of that?
Yeah, so OSHA has the ability to come on to any work job site and do an audit. Um, Often things that start that, that actually get them there, is an injury that has already happened. So if someone is hospitalized, um, dies, loses a limb, they have the employer has to report that to OSHA, and that immediately starts the investigation, and they'll be on site. Another thing is employees can um, send can report, their work environment to OSHA, and then that'll also cause OSHA to come out. So oftentimes, if it's a job site, um, OSHA won't be there because, nothing has happened, or people just don't spark that conversation about safety. But as soon as OSHA does come, they have full authority to stop the work and issue penalties towards the companies who are failing to provide that safety equipment to their workers. Anything else? All right, thanks, guys.
All right. I'm gonna go next here. Just pull up my presentation real quick. Levi, I think you have to approve my request
Oh,
for
I
screen
got you.
sharing. Yeah, thanks. Can you guys see my presentation okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, my presentation is about biometric authentication. As far as the little outline goes, I'm going to talk about biometrics, what it is, how does it work, where is it used, things like that, and then move on to values, principles, policies, the analysis of real world practices, and a little bit of discussion at the end. So, I guess the first question I should answer is what is authentication? And authentication is just a way to figure out if someone is who they say they are. And there's three main ways to do that. One, you could figure that out by what they know, so like a password or something like that. You could also figure it out by what they have. So if I send a text message to their phone number with like a code and they can recite the code to me, then I know that this person has been authenticated. And the last way is what they are, right? So uh, their fingerprint, their iris, uh, their face, things like that. Um, and according to IBM, uh, biometric authentication is a method that uses physical characteristics of a person, such as facial features, iris scans, fingerprints, to verify their identity before granting access to sensitive data or systems. So, yeah, it basically uses somebody's biology to figure out if they are who they say they are. Um, and the big thing with biometrics is one, uh, it has to measure traits that are one, measurable, two, distinct, and three, unlikely to change. So you can use like somebody's height, for example, that is measurable, but it's not distinct. There could be two people who are the same height, and it is likely to change depending on their age. Um, so things like height or, like hair color, eye color, that stuff doesn't exactly translate well. What does translate well is things like your fingerprints, your iris, your voice, your facial features, things like that. And they're, for the most part, pretty measurable and pretty distinct, and mostly unlikely to change, outside of like the possibility of like injuries or something like that. They're like your fingerprint, for example, usually uh, pretty much never changes. Um, so the way that it works is initially um, it collects the initial data of the person who will be authenticated against. So like uh, for your phone unlock, for example, you have to it has to take a look at your fingerprint a few times for it uh, to store that data. And so whenever somebody comes to authenticate, it'll match that person's data with the data that is stored. And if it matches, then authentication is confirmed. If it doesn't match, then it's failed. Um, so this brings up a slight concern in terms of security. Um, if your phone, for example, stores your fingerprints, it has to keep that data super secure because otherwise, if it gets hacked or somebody gets access to your fingerprint data, they can go ahead and uh, create copies of your fingerprint, and that can screw somebody over. And you can't just go out and change your fingerprint. So data security is a really big concern here. And also something else that's worth mentioning is like for facial scans, for example, it doesn't always store like the entire data of your face. It only stores like key points. And that's to save on one space, you're storing less data. And two, it speeds up verification. So the less data points there are to verify, the faster it can verify you, and then you can log into your phone, for example. As far as where it's used, a big one is access control to like let's say like government facilities and stuff like that. Another big one is multi-factor authentication. So using it to log into your phone, for example, or using it as like a secondary authentication for like your school account or something like that. Another one is surveillance. So surveillance will use like one fingerprints or facial recognition in order to recognize any person of interest, particularly criminals, which could be used against someone. So I'm not 100% sure how I feel about that, but it is what it is. And another new one is payment processing. Well, relatively new. As you can see, I have this picture of Whole Foods, which they have palm scanners, which you could use your palm to pay for your groceries, which is kind of cool, I guess. But if somebody steals the data of your palm, they can go around charging your credit card. So, um, as far as the values go, I would say this is better security compared to a password or what you have, because it's a lot easier to find out somebody's password or to get access to their phone than it is to, clone their iris or clone their fingerprint. That's much more difficult to do. Another one is convenience. So you don't really have to go around remembering a password, or you don't have to, have something on you like an access card or your phone to authenticate. You simply just use your body. So that makes it super convenient. And the last one is accountability. Um, if let's say you access a government facility with like a palm scan, the chances that it's actually you are way higher than, using a password or a key card or something. So you're much more accountable when it comes to um, uh, biometric authentication, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. Um, Good thing if your data is really secure. If it's not super secure, I'd say that's a pretty bad thing. As far as the principles go, um, collection of biometric data should be necessary. So it should be used for something where authentication is absolutely necessary, like a bank account or something like that, and it should be appropriate. You shouldn't have to do an iris scan to get into your school's library, for example. That's way overkill, right? But for like a government facility with like classified information and things like that, I would say it's pretty appropriate. Another one is notice. So anyone whose biometric data is being collected and used for authentication, they should be notified by that because it's personally identifiable information. And I think you should be notified whenever any of that kind of information is collected about you. Another one is data quality. So the data that is collected about you should be super accurate because if it's not, then it might report false positives or false negatives. And that can be a pretty bad thing as well. So you want it to be accurate. And then the last one is data security. You want your data to be secured. If somebody steals your fingerprints, again, you're kind of screwed. So yeah. Um, One interesting thing I found out about biometric authentication is that there's really no federal law like uh, enforcing like laws or restrictions when it comes to disclosure of biometric data, which is kind of scary. I kind of thought there would be, but there is none. That's all handled by the Federal Trade Commission. Um, there are, however, a few state laws that do handle it. So, for example, the Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act, that was the first state legislation to directly regulate biometric information in terms of consent, uh, opt out. People can opt out of using uh, biometric authentication and data retention. Uh, if you don't want your biometric data to be retained anymore, you can request that and transparency, things like that. This was back in 2008. Um, yeah, another big one was the California Privacy Rights Act. Um, it made it so that biometric information legally had to be protected by any collector of biometric information. It also enabled more consumer rights in terms of access to their own biometric data, as well as requests to delete it. Uh, yeah, in terms of applications for this technology, it's widely used in consumer electronics. Like I said, again, like your phone, your laptop. Uh, a lot of law enforcement databases have biomet copies of biometric data, such as fingerprints and facial scans, things like that. And also, some workplaces use it for like employee time clocks. So when you clock in or clock out, you have to do like a palm scan or something like that to verify that the person who's clocking in, uh, that nobody else is clocking in for you for work, which I mean, I guess makes sense, but I feel like that's a little intrusive. And also for financial transactions, like I said, with the Whole Foods thing. Um, and then I prepared a few questions. So the first one is should biometrics be treated differently than passwords? Why or why not? You guys have any thoughts on that?
Um, Treated differently, how would you say?
In terms of, I guess, uh, how it's protected, let's say,
Mm,
should there be more laws governing how well the data should be protected or how it should be used, whether or not it can be shared with third parties, things like that.
I think since it's, bio, it's your physical self. I think there should be more, at least consideration about more, protection there. That's my first, you know, thought for it. It's yourself. Like, it's, I feel like it would be important to keep that, protected.
Yeah, um I think it should. Just because it's on the realm of identity theft. Like if you have someone's password, um, that's not them. That's a thing that they can change. But if you have someone's iris or who knows, brain scan or something later on, like that's something that's not like you can't change that. And you're stuck with like having your information out there. I mean, that's the same thing with um social security numbers and stuff. So I think there's definitely a difference between the two. Um, Biometrics are a lot more uh, like personal to people than passwords.
Right, right. I 100% agree with that. Um, and I think the eagerness in which we give away like our fingerprints should be a little concerning, but I mean, it is very convenient. So yeah. Another one is, should employers be allowed to require biometric authentication? This is whether it's for clocking in and clocking out, or, let's say you need like some special clearance to access like a government facility or something like that. Do you think biometrics is a good, good way to authenticate someone?
I think it's relative. Like it depends on what you're trying to get into or what information you're trying to access. Like if it is like top secret stuff, then I can see why you need to have someone's iris or fingerprint. Um, but for something less so, like security wise, I think passwords generally do a decent job. I mean, I don't know the statistics behind how often this stuff gets stolen or um, like if someone has your iris, I don't know, but I think it just depends on what's locked up.
Yeah, I agree. I think employers, um, should be able to, kind of increase their security, and um, especially if there's, high, um, valued stuff that they store and work with. So I'm for it.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'd say I generally agree with it. Like the only thing that I'm a little iffy on would be that, like using biometrics for clocking in and clocking out. Like not that there's anything wrong with, trying to verify that the person is who's doing the work is the person you actually hired. But I feel like that's like a little intrusive. Like it's kind of given like, I don't know, like 1984 vibes a little bit. Uh, so like I'm not really a big fan of using it for like clocking in, clocking out. But for like, like security clearances and stuff like that, I think it makes complete sense. Um, and as far as for this last question, who would be responsible if fingerprint data is stolen? Uh, I think I'm gonna give my opinion real quick. I mean, I think the holder of the data is the one who's responsible. I think it's pretty clear, but I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Whoever, is collecting the data, um, definitely has the responsibility to protect it.
Same here. I mean, like if the company is like using maybe it's a service of like biometric service, um, like if someone happens to be like selling information, like that's like again, like the company who's holding the information is definitely responsible.
Absolutely. And that's pretty much all of the questions that I had prepared. You guys had any additional questions or thoughts on like this whole topic, I guess?
I had a question about the cost. What does it cost to implement biometric authentication compared to, passwords?
It's generally more expensive, you know. Um, Collecting a password and then storing it in a database somewhere is uh it's a lot cheaper, you know. It's just when you collect a password, it's just like a series of characters. And then usually they like hash it or encrypt it and then store it in the database. Uh, because if you don't hash or encrypt it, if somebody has access to the database, they have all the passwords.
Mm,
But with like with let's say your fingerprint, for example, one, you need like actual hardware that one scans a fingerprint and it has to be pretty accurate. And then I assume, before it's like stored in a database as well, they have to hash it or encrypt it or something. Because if somebody gets access to the database, they could get everyone's fingerprints. So that part is probably the same, but like the data collection and testing, you need special hardware, whether it's like an iris scan or palm scan or fingerprint. So it's definitely more expensive to implement by, I'd say, a pretty decent margin compared to like a password or like phone authentication or something like that. Any other thoughts? If not, I want to thank you guys, and I'll kick it over to James.
Can y'all see it?
no, we can't. I can't.
Do that. Oh, okay.
It's still not
Okay.
showing up for me at
Is
least.
it not?
Okay, wait, now it
Okay,
is.
that's
No, it is. Okay. All right. So I did my tech assessment on bioprinting. Um, I was kind of intrigued from the medical tech assessment. Um, and I just kind of decided I want to explore this a little more. So here's my presentation overview. I'm just going to run through background all the way through analysis of practices and conclusion. So bioprinting is a pretty new technology. Um, it's really similar to 3D printing, except now we've begun to print uh, organs, vascular systems, tissue, cartilage, other stuff like that. Um, it's just a process of it's an additive manufacturing project progress, and um, it aims to hopefully reduce the shortage of transplant organs, along with immune rejections. So when an organ's like placed in someone else, a lot of times like DNA and other stuff, and the immune system doesn't like the new organ. But hopefully with this new technology, the organs actually can be matched to the person. Um, Also, this like cellular lithography could also accelerate drug research if they're able to produce mock organs, so to speak, or tissues that they could test drugs on to test viability, other stuff like that. Um, Again, it's a pretty new technology. Kind of started off in 1984 in its infancy, all the way to nowadays, where new and new printers are kind of coming out. Inkjet printers, simple deposition of cells was kind of the early form of bioprinting. Um, Later, complex structures were able to be created with living cells. Um, and now today we're at electrohydrodynamic jetting. It's kind of a more complicated version. There's a simpler picture of kind of how this works with the piezoelectric kind of thing, where you put a current through a material and it causes the material to actually like shrink or grow. So you can kind of use it as a valve almost and use super accurate printing methods. So that's kind of the basics of the printing of the cells. But nowadays there we haven't gotten to organ replication. There's definitely a future in it. But for now, we're just printing skin grafts, cartilage, vascular stuff, tissue models, and whatnot. So my values, I think first off, uh, a medical technology should reduce like suffering. Um, and this kind of points to the shortage of organs and other biomaterial that could be used to save lives potentially, reduce illnesses. That's the ultimate goal, I think, for me, at least looking at this technology. Also, respect for individual autonomy. Uh, a big part of bioprinting is cells. So there has to be actually be, you can't just print out of thin air. You have to actually have cells. I'll go into this a little bit later, but um, like reprogram cells that can be programmed to become any organ. Um, Patients should have informed control over medical decisions, especially bioprinting that affects their bodies. So kind of like where these cells come from, um, like tracking the cells and how it's going to affect them, or if they're giving. Another value is equity and justice. So like this new technology is coming out, and first off, right now it's pretty expensive considering that it's a new technology. Um, but these access to life-saving technologies shouldn't just be limited to those with money, but eventually they should lower in cost and allow life-saving technology. Um, to be accessible to those in lower standards of living. Scientific progress and innovation. So bioprinting is definitely pushing the envelope of medical technologies, um, and the knowledge that people have in this is definitely advancing the medical field. Um, and another value I have is protection of harm. It kind of goes along with the first one in human suffering, goes kind of hand in hand with the Hippocratic Oath. The quote isn't exactly from the Hippocratic Oath, but it's from Hippocrates, where medicine and people who practice medicine should first do no harm. So bioprinting should minimize physical, physiological, social risks from harm, um, and kind of piggybacking all of this is the moral and ethics behind it all. Stem cells and other biomaterial shouldn't be gathered from embryos or sources that destroy like nascent human life. I believe that's one of my big values, um, especially considering bioprinting because of the sourcing of these cells. There are other ways that you can source these cells for the printing. Um, but yeah, onto principles that build off of the values. Beneficence, technology should promote well-being, improve health outcomes. Um, when you implement a new medical technology, I mean, it's not like the harnesses that come with safety. That's a pretty, I'd say straightforward. There isn't any cons other than shortfallings and things that just need to be improved with like harnesses. But when you implement a medical thing, in some ways, like you can deal without it. Like there are things like bioprinting, you could not have it, and I mean things would happen, like bad things would happen without it, but there are always cons to these things. And first and foremost, they should promote well-being when you're weighing the pros and cons. Again, harm to individuals should ultimately be avoided, but again, there's things that you cannot avoid, and thus should be minimized. Again, autonomy. Individuals must provide informed consent for the use of their cells or tissues. Again, going back to the sourcing of the cells, especially embryonic cells, um, where there is no consent. So that's where I find a big problem in that. Um, Benefits of risk bioprinting should be distributed fairly, going hand in hand with the disparity between wealth and poor and this availability of this new technology. Accountability is a big one. Researchers, corporations, regulators must be transparent and responsible. As we all know, there's not a lot of transparency in the medical field nowadays between insurance, payment options, and stuff like that. Um, so bioprinting could help lower that and be more transparent. Policies, since it's a new technology, there really aren't uh, any policies regulating this technology. When I was reading it, like, there were many things mentioning that there really wasn't any policies governing this. Um, but the readings did mention that since there's no new ones, that the ones already existing have to be adapted, and changed to kind of cover this, especially in ethical and moral standards. There's oversight committees, uh, like limiting commercialization to prevent exploitation, which would worsen organ trafficking if this were to be commercialized. So there needs to be uh, strict regulatory things to kind of keep that in check. And the distinction between therapeutic use and the enhancement. Um, Nowadays, we see a lot of medical technology being used for non-essential things, kind of the delaying death society, how we see like this technology could be used to not only improve but also lengthen life or postpone death. Again, there's no specific legal policy regarding bioprinting, um, but existing ones have been adapted to encompass the new technology. The analysis practice, so again, they're just printing tissue and other vascular systems at the moment. Patient-specific bioprinting organs align strongly with societal values to reduce the wait lists. It's kind of reducing the harm and suffering that would come with a shortage of organs. Um, that's the ultimate goal, I believe. But also harping back on kind of the sourcing of the cells. When I was talking about the cells that are kind of the building block of printing organs, is the use of adult stem cells or induced pluripotent stem cells supports autonomy and especially consent. Kind of this is juxtaposed with embryonic stem cells, where embryonic stem cells are harvested from embryos that most of them have been aborted, um, where induced pluripotent stem cells actually come from either the patient or someone who has donated them. They can be basically reprogrammed to become any cell that you want. So you could just print basically an organ. They can use skin cells, you can reprogram them to become, say, a liver. Um, Clinical trials require careful monitoring due to unknown long-term effects. Again, this is a new technology, and there still has to be careful monitoring of this technology when it comes to the trials and development. Um, Commercial involvement's another big one. It could be good to have this be pushed into the commercial realm. It could accelerate the innovation, but again, it also risks unequal access and profit-driven decision making instead of um, kind of analyzing the effects, because people are just going to start reaching for money, and the global disparities may widen uh, again between the wealthy and the non-wealthy, um, because new technologies kind of push that envelope if they're not made affordable. Um, and enhancement-oriented uses, performance, like non-essential kind of medical reasons, can raise concerns about fairness and social equality. If you have one person, I don't know, like printing something that's non-essential when there's other people dying from organ failure who have been waiting to receive an organ for a while. And you have other people just doing non-essential operations and printing things when it could be used for the greater good. That's all I had so far. Um, but yeah, any questions? Is this a viable future for medical technology and opinions on source of cells?
Yeah. I have a question about the source for stem cells. So, you mentioned that sourcing them from the patient themselves or from a donor is the ideal way to do it. But like, do you know how they are collected from like the patient or donor?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of like stem cells that can be found in bone marrow, so you can actually like harvest it from the patient. Just you just go in uh, and harvest like non-essential cells that like wouldn't cause any further harm to the patient, but then could just be taken from the patient or someone else who's donated, um, and basically reprogram them to be whatever you want to print.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a like follow-up question to that. So you mentioned that they sort of like, like they harvest non-essential cells and then they reprogram them to be like the cell
Mhm.
that they want. Uh, do you have like any idea how the reprogramming works at all?
Um, I forget what they do, but they basically, I think they, I don't, they attach something or inject the cell with some code, DNA strand or something. On this basically just kind of resets the cell. Like if you pulled it from like a skin cell and you update it with new like DNA code, say, hey, you can become any other cell. I mean, that's the basis of embryonic cells, is why so many people like jump to that. Is like when human life is in its earliest form, there's all these cells that are basically like type O. They're universal. They can become um, any other part of the body. That's how like human development happens. So there's all these stem cells that start to become assigned, like become your hands, your feet, your liver, all of your organs. So if you can reprogram cells that don't come from like aborted children, um, that's a plus.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think the reprogramming thing is actually really cool. It's interesting that
Yeah,
the human body works
it's
these
pretty
ways.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the reprogramming too. Um, but I would ask, like, what when you first learned about this, like the first time I learned about it was the medical assessment for this
Mhm.
class. What was your first initial reaction to it? And then now after your research, what's your take on it after the research?
I mean, at first I was like really curious. It's like the way we're actually printing like biomaterial
Mhm.
organs, like that's kind of crazy. Um, honestly, didn't like I didn't have any objections at first, because I didn't really understand how it worked. But when I started researching and finding out like how this is supposed to work and like how cells are sourced, um, then I could definitely see like the pitfalls. Like when you first see this technology, you're like, wow, this is great. Like this could be perfect. And then you see how it's like actually done. Because like you can't just again print out of thin air. You have to pull from somewhere. Um, so there's a bunch of sourcing, a bunch of it's a lot of moral and ethical things as medicine is. But
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add was like if they can get the costs of like this whole like process down to so that it's like actually affordable for like
mhm.
let's say the average person, I think this is absolutely a viable future for the medical technology. I think
Yeah, I have to
it'll
agree.
yeah, it'll solve a lot of the problems with like the organ shortage and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think this is definitely worth investing in. That's my
Yeah.
personal opinion.
Cool. Anything else?
I got nothing.
All right.
All right, that'll do it. Thank you guys.
Absolutely.